Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization Daily Update for Tuesday, December 30th. I'm going to start with what Helga Zepp-LaRouche had told collaborators of hers yesterday in an international call. She said that, "So the world is hanging between hope and disaster where the decision has not yet been made. But it is very clear that the overall strategic crisis will be the dominant feature in 2026, no matter what happens now in the next period around Ukraine." So clearly referring to some of the positive statements that were coming out around a potential diplomatic resolution to the crisis in Ukraine, both from the U.S. side and the Russian side. Trump basically was positive about the potential to resolve the crisis. Peskov essentially stated that Moscow believes the end of the conflict is approaching and that U.S. President Trump is correct to say that the Ukraine peace talks are in their final phase. That's a summary of what Peskov said. Peskov added, of course, there needs to be some substance to it. Now, following the meeting between Trump and Zelensky, the acting president of Ukraine, Putin and Donald Trump also held a phone call. This was, I think, agreed before the meeting with Zelensky that Trump had said he would call Putin to brief him on what the discussions were. Now, Trump said it was a very good talk, very productive. The Kremlin foreign policy aide to Putin, Yuri Ushakov, stated that effectively both presidents in a very friendly manner agreed to maintain dialogues onwards. He noted the 17 contacts that U.S. representatives have held with the Russian side, with Putin in particular, the meetings with Witkoff and Kushner, and of course the summit in Alaska, and the number of phone calls, just 2 in the last couple of days, to which Ushakov said you can draw your own conclusions about what that means in terms of these various contacts. And then he said that Trump informed Putin about certain results achieved by Zelensky's team precisely in this direction, in the direction of peace, but which nevertheless, in our assessment, still leave the Kiev authorities room for various interpretations in order to evade fulfillment to their commitments. Now, that obviously beyond Zelensky and company to evade fulfillment of their commitments, we have the coalition of the willing, or the coalition of the warmongers, who intend to meet to perform their side of the sabotage of any resolution. But coming from Ukraine in the immediate aftermath, if not while the discussions were going on between the Russian and U.S. side, we had the attack on Vladimir Putin's residence just outside of Moscow. As well as the Mirotvorets listing Trump as a war criminal. This actually occurred a couple of weeks ago. They had on their website, this has been referred to as a kill list because of course a number of the people that have made the list of Putin or Russian propagandists and so on and so forth, a number of the journalists and associated people have actually been assassinated. So calling it a kill list is not hyperbole. But in their Mirotvorets news, they had an article on December 13th, essentially in the context of Belarus and what other European nations were doing. They said that they called the president, Donald Trump, Putin's friend and an international war criminal. So that obviously is how they are thinking about this peace process and Trump's attempt to move the peace process forward. I think it should be, we'll have something that we'll write up for the Executive Intelligence Review site, but this is something that the White House and the Secret Service should take very seriously. I would just recall that one of the creators, or at least who oversaw the creation of the Marotverat sites, as well as the Nazi Azov Brigade, an individual named Arsen Avakov, who was the interior minister of Ukraine at the time, he met with Christopher Wray in 2018. This was at the height of the whole Russiagate insanity that the FBI was certainly involved in. Wray and Avakov signed agreements relating to matters of Russian aggression and cybercrime and so forth. So you get a sense that these are not just isolated actors inside of Ukraine publishing kill lists and so on. These are people that are integrated within the U.S. deep state. I would only just add to that the NSA, U.S. Cyber Command, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they were very intensely collaborating with Ukraine's cyber apparatus, some of it around the so-called Defend Forward program of NSA Cybercom and the Election Security Group, which is a part of that, as well as the Hunt Forward policy, which was the integration of the U.S. cyber side with Ukraine's cyber side. So anyway, the point is Trump should take this seriously. It should be seen as a lot of these cyber operations in Ukraine should be seen as a kind of a proxy within the deep state of the United States. Now, coming back to the actual assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin, whether this was to be successful or not, it sends a very clear message of 91 kamikaze drones in the Novgorod region that, as Sergei Lavrov said, they were shot down before they reached the state premises, that is where Putin, or one of Putin's residencies. Well, let me just add that Zelensky has basically said that, denied any responsibility from Ukraine's side of this, instead saying that this was lies by Russia. This will be used to justify a massive attack on Ukraine. Trump sort of threw them a bone on that matter, saying that, he told reporters, you're saying maybe the attack didn't take place. That's possible too, I guess, but President Putin told me this morning it did in the phone call that he had with Putin. But otherwise, Trump did say that he was very angry, and then usefully stated that he was glad that the U.S. did not supply the Tomahawks, which of course could have been a dramatic escalation. Now, on that, Ushakov, again, Putin's foreign policy aide, said that in Trump's phone call with Putin, he said that the U.S. president was shocked by this information, literally outraged. He said that he could not even imagine such irrational actions. And as was stated, this will undoubtedly affect the approaches of the United States. And then again, he said, as it pertains to working with Zelensky, Ushakov added that to whom the Trump administration, as Donald Trump himself said, did not, thank God, give Tomahawks. So now on the effect of this, whether it was likely or potential to actually kill Vladimir Putin, the Russians have otherwise said, according to Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, he said it was an act of terrorism aimed at derailing the negotiations and not just aimed at President Putin personally. He then added that this was directed against Trump, against President Trump's effort to facilitate peaceful resolution of the Ukraine conflict. So clearly that, and I would add, in addition to the earlier, the Marotverat sites from a couple of weeks ago, all of this is designed to derail the peace process. Now, the attack on Putin was condemned by China, the United Arab Emirates, Pakistan, Modi personally, as one might expect. As to the response from Moscow, Lavrov basically said that Russia's negotiating position will be revised in light of these reckless actions. And then otherwise said, Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, said that targets for retaliatory strikes and the time of their implementation by the Russian armed forces have been determined. it should just be added that as part of this, clearly the Ukrainians or their benefactors or their controllers are attempting to try to get some, escalated response from the Russian side, perhaps targeting Bankarova, the residency of where Zelensky lives. That there's been numerous calls from the Russian side, different political layers inside of Russia to do exactly that. So we'll have to see what the response by the Russians will be. Zakara added that the answers will not be diplomatic. Let them not get their hopes up, clearly indicating that there will be some sort of military or kinetic response to this. Now, I think, just to state it clearly, this is not being organized by Ukraine per se. Just recall the British role in sabotaging every single attempt at diplomatic resolution, whether it was Boris Johnson's sabotage of the diplomatic negotiations in 2022. They've played their role on it, and clearly the so-called deep state, whatever you want to call it, but I would characterize it as the private mercenary forces of the City of London and Wall Street, special operations forces, certain layers of the intelligence community, clearly MI6, CIA, the so-called interagency process with the FBI, MI5. All of this is what Fletcher Prouty once described as the focal point system. That is an elite grouping that can run these sort of special operations and targeted assassinations and so on. In addition, these are people very heavily involved with the psychological warfare side, around the censorship regime and so on and so forth. That's another story, but I just want to be clear that when we say that the British are involved in this, we're not referring to merry old England. We're referring to this particular international and interagency grouping that would run these kind of operations. Now, these are operations described yesterday by what Helga Zepp-LaRouche referred to as total war. And she specifically cited the article out of the Foreign Affairs from, I believe it was last year. Foreign Affairs is, of course, the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations, which was literally established to be the U.S. side of the Chatham House of London, one of the key think tanks out of the British monarchy and the City of London crowd. Now, what that article was entitled was The Return to Total War. I unfortunately don't have the name of the person, Mara. Anyway, she was the Undersecretary of Department of Defense Undersecretary that was involved in international and strategic affairs. In the article, The Return to Total War, Understanding and Preparing for a New Era of Comprehensive Conflict. She says that an era of limited war has ended, an age of comprehensive conflict has begun, and calls then for total war, in which combatants draw on vast resources, mobilize their societies, prioritize warfare over all other state activities, attack a broad variety of targets, and reshape their economies and those of other countries, adding the other elements of the hybrid warfare, new technologies, AI, these kind of things. She adds in this discussion more broadly, strategists should consider how future state-on-state warfare might be combined with insurgency. They should also think through how a panoply of actors on and off the battlefield, including non-state groups and commercial entities, might support the primary antagonist. This is what we're seeing, and it was iterated by Blaise Metroelli, the new head of MI6, in her first statement and so on. It's this idea that we're going to draw on the whole of society, as was referred to in this Foreign Affairs article, and mobilize the entirety of society for war, especially as we're seeing in these nations of the European Union, whether that's Germany, France, so on and so forth. So again, just to return to what Helge Zepp-LaRouche had said yesterday, that the world is hanging between hope and disaster. The decisions haven't been made, but this is going to be the strategic crisis will be the dominant feature of 2026. I didn't cover some of the other elements. We of course have as I mentioned yesterday, the war games or the naval exercises by China concerning Taiwan in response to the many billions that were just pumped in from the U.S., the largest ever weapon supply that was given to Taiwan. We, of course, have the situations in Nigeria, Venezuela, which remains a kind of a powder keg. And then something else that Helge Zepp-LaRouche referred to yesterday is, will 2026 see the year that U.S. long-range missiles are stationed in Germany? That would elicit a massive response from Russia. And, of course, we have just in February the expiration of the New START treaty, which the Russians have offered to just continue as is for the next year without any changes. So again, as Helge Zepp-LaRouche has reiterated, we have to have a global realignment and a new security and development architecture that is designed and benefits all of humanity. That's the only way that it could move forward. And what better way to approach 2026, the year of our 250th anniversary of the celebration of our independence from the British. And today we need the independence from the special relationship that exists between the Wall Street and the City of London crowd and their various private mercenary forces or government agencies that they've co-opted. That needs to be severed, and U.S. A commitment to the real aims of the American Revolution, that is to be a friend to all nations and to pursue the economic development of all nations. That's effectively what Helge is calling for in this new security and development architecture. So we'll have some surprising or exciting developments as part of our intervention into the institution of the presidency, or I should say those associated with Lyndon LaRouche and Helge Zepp-LaRouche. And that is, so stay tuned to that and stay tuned to the LaRouche organization.